All right, I'm starting the recording so I don't mess up like that again. I still have to re-record chapter 6 and put it on YouTube. We're going to look at chapter 7 tonight, chapter 8, excuse me, tonight. Let me share my screen. And okay. Let's see if it comes up the way it's supposed to. Is that good?
Yeah.
Okay. I never know, but I put my PowerPoint. I'm trying to keep the glare off my head. I put the PowerPoint on my camera computer, and then I've got the second screen so I can see what you guys are doing.
Now,
So
you know what I'm doing. I'm laying in bed in my PJs.
I got home this evening and I went to the living room. I said, do you guys mind if I move out here to the living room so I can put my feet up for the class tonight? I was met with, well, you can, but so I didn't.
I have too many people to run off, so.
Yeah. Well, let's pray and we'll get started. Lord, we do thank you for this time this evening, for Lauren and Angela and whoever else joins us tonight. Those that watch this on YouTube later, I pray that you will just bless each one, provide them with a lesson that they can use, that they can take into the world. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. So, did anybody get to read chapter 8?
Yeah, I read it.
Okay. I may not have made clear where we were at. I just recorded chapter 7. Was it last week? Well, last week Thanksgiving.
Yeah,
last week we didn't have it last week, right?
Right. Okay. Yeah. So I recorded chapter 7. I didn't have anybody with me, so I just recorded it and put it on Facebook. I mean, on YouTube. Hey, there he is. So anyway, chapter 7 was a continuation of chapter 6, the story of Gideon. And it starts out with Gideon's forces making camp on a hill overlooking the Midianites' encampment. God decides that there are too many soldiers in Gideon's army, and that's really interesting. Too many soldiers. So he has Gideon send away the ones that say that they're too afraid to fight, too scared to fight. And then he still, when he pares them down from 30,000 to 10,000, God says that's still way too many. So he has Gideon send the soldiers down to the river, or down to the water, 10,000 of them, to drink the water. And whoever knelt to drink were sent home. But the ones who picked up the water in their hands and lapped it like a dog, about 300 were kept to fight the Midianites. That was a very interesting story. I still don't know why somebody would lap water like a dog.
I always thought that was really weird when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Like
I can't picture it. It's like drinking with a straw. You can't be tough and drink with a straw. you just look too silly.
Were they like scooping it in their hand?
That's what I'm thinking, but
Okay.
I'm picturing the tongue coming out and
Yeah, I
actually
know.
lapping. Yeah.
I know my youngest grandson, he literally does that. He's been around the dog too long.
Oh,
And I was like, well, he's 3, but we're talking about grown men and armies here.
yeah, yeah. And that's why I said that. These guys are big and tough, and they're supposed to look intimidating, and that's one thing I learned when I was a kid. You cannot look big and tough and intimidating when you're slurping soda through a straw. You have an automatic smile on your face regardless.
Do you
But
think
anyway,
that he kept the ones he kept the ones that laughed, right?
right,
So,
yes.
do you think
300
it's
of them.
because they were more on guard than the ones that like got down in the water and weren't really paying attention to their surroundings?
That actually my commentary that I did the research for chapter 7 suggested that they were more alert. But it was
Yeah.
just a suggestion. There's no real nothing that tells us this is
Yeah, it doesn't
exactly
really
why.
say why.
But that
Okay.
is a good observation. Absolutely. All right. So all of this was done so that the Israelites could not say it was by their own ability. God was the one that defeats the Midianites, not the Israelites. So from 30,000 down to 300, and 300 men are going to go and take out the Midianites who number over 100,000. About 120,000, I think I read. And then God sends Gideon down to the Midianite camp after the 300 are chosen. And he overhears one of the Midianite soldiers describing a dream. And another soldier is telling him, well, this is what your dream means. I don't remember the exact dream. I think I can probably come up with it pretty quick. Yeah, I had a dream, and in it a cake of barley bread tumbled into the camp of the Midian and came to the tent and struck it so that it fell. It turned upside down and the tent collapsed. The buddy, the other soldier, said, well, that means that Gideon, the son of Joash, and his army are going to come to our camp and wipe us out. And that, if you remember, Gideon's been very skittish the whole time about doing what God tells him to do. So his confidence is bolstered when he hears the dream and the interpretation. Back in this day, the dreams were considered sacred. They were that they almost always, if not always, had some type of a meaning. You remember several times throughout, several people were called to the king or called to somebody to interpret a dream. So that's Gideon felt like it was God talking to him when he heard this dream and interpretation. All right, so after his confidence is bolstered, he goes back to his camp. He gathers his soldiers. He tells them, take a trumpet. You may have heard the term shofar. That a shofar is a hollowed out ram's horn that's used as a trumpet. And they actually use that to give commands on the battlefield. That's one of the uses for the shofar. But everybody takes a trumpet and they take a torch hidden in a jar of clay, a clay jar. The best I could figure was the clay jar. Well, I put it on the screen there. The clay jar was to hide the light of the torch until it was time to attack. The 300 surround the Midian camp, and on the signal, they blow the horn, they bust the jar and raise the torch, and they shout for the Lord and for Gideon. And all of this commotion, because the Midianites were not ready for battle, all this commotion and God's intervention also caused the Midianites to retreat. They thought they were surrounded by a massive army, and it was just 300 men.
Were they were asleep when this happened, right?
Probably, yeah. That I would say that it took place, just maybe not in a 24-hour period, but it was actually the second watch of the night, which is
Okay.
I don't remember the hours for the watches, but there's 3 watches through the night, and this took place on the second watch. And so all of this takes place. The as the soldiers are running away, retreating, Gideon sends out messengers, and some of the other tribes in the hill country respond and take up chasing the Midianites. They found 2 of the leaders. The leaders' name were Oreb and Zeb, and the places that they were killed were named after them. The rock of Oreb, and Zeb was killed at the wine press of Zeb. So these leaders are taken out. They're not kings. We're going to talk about the kings of the Midianites tonight. Any questions about chapter 7 before we get going? That was a very rough and quick description of that chapter. All right. Chapter 8, verses 1 through 9. Let me pull this over here where I can see it better. If I do get a glare off the top of my head, you guys tell me.
Okay.
I took my light out from facing me, and I'm now in dark for some reason. So, starting at verse 1. Then the Ephraimites said to him, "What have you done to us, not to call us when you went to fight against the Midianites?" And they upbraided him violently. So he said to them, "What have I done now in comparison with you? Is not the gleaning of the grapes in Ephraim," I always say Ephraim, I'm sorry, "better than the vintage of Abiezer? God has given into your hands the captains of Midian, Oreb and Zeb. What have I been able to do in this comparison with you?" When he said this, their anger against them subsided. Then Gideon came to the Jordan and crossed over, he and 300 and the 300 who were with him, exhausted and famished, were exhausted and famished. So he said to the people of Sukkoth, "Please give some loaves of bread to my followers, for they are exhausted, and I am pursuing Zebah and Zalmunna, the kings of Midian." But the officials of Sukkoth said, "Do you already have in your possession the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna, that we should give bread to your army?" Gideon replied, "Well then, when the Lord has given Zebah and Zalmunna into my hand, I will trample your flesh on the thorns of the wilderness and on briars." From there he went up to Penuel and made the same request of them, and the people of Penuel answered him as the people of Sukkoth had answered. So he said to the people of Penuel, "When I come back victorious, I will break down this tower." All right. So anything in that you want to discuss before we start breaking it down? All right.
I
Yes,
have a
go ahead.
question.
Go
So
for it.
the people of Sukkoth,
Yes.
they also wanted them to kill Zebah and Zalmunna.
Well, what it is they don't trust Gideon's ability.
Okay.
Gideon is asking them, "Feed my army while I pursue these kings." And when they asked, "Do you already have the kings of the hands of these kings?"
Mm-hmm.
that was a way of letting people know that prisoners had been captured. A hand was removed and brought,
Okay.
as evidence. And so Sukkoth said, "You have these hands?" "No, I don't have those yet." And they said, "Well, we don't need to support you then. You
Okay.
haven't done what you said you were going to do." Same with Penuel. They did the exact same thing. We don't trust you. We don't believe that you're going to catch these guys. So we're not going to support you either. And Gideon lets them know, I'm gonna
Pretty
do what I said I'm
harshly.
gonna do. Yes,
He's tired and hungry
right.
and
And we've
mad.
been there before, haven't we?
Yeah. I don't think I've ever been like, I'm going to tear you up with thorns.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But I've said to my kids, I'm going to beat your butt.
Uh-huh. That's right.
That's just
All
really
Yeah, it
weird.
made me
But
think of Rodney when I read that. It's like, yeah, Rodney gets angry.
Yeah. All right. So oh, the passage of the gleaning of, about the gleaning of the grapes is likely from a proverb, something known locally to those people. I'm not really sure exactly what that was. Nobody, I mean, all the research I did, nobody came up with this is what gleaning of the grapes means. I know it's harvesting grapes, but I don't understand why he used that picture with the Ephraimites. So whatever it is, Gideon's intention is to butter up Ephraim, kind of calm them down so that he can undertake what he has to do next. And it works. They lose their anger towards him. We've just talked about this. Sukkoth is on the east side of the Jordan River. When the Israelites first came to the Promised Land, they crossed the Jordan River from the east to the west. So they were in like the wilderness on the east side of the Jordan. This is where Sukkoth is from. And Penuel is a neighboring village, so it's the same. They're both kind of out in the wilderness. The officials of these communities are not confident in Gideon's abilities. They turn him away, and sounds as if Gideon gets his feelings hurt more than anything. And I kind of got the picture of like an elementary school kid that, well, if you do that, I'm going to do this. I'm going to get you back. So, yeah, that's that. They withhold their hospitality towards Gideon and his army. All right. Anything else in that passage? All right, we're going to catch up to the kings in this next passage. Now Zebah and Zalmunna were in Karkor with their army, about 15,000 men. All who were left, all who were left of the army of the people of the east, for 120,000 men bearing arms had fallen. So Gideon went up by the caravan route east. I'm losing my place, of Nobah and Jogbeha, and attacked the army, for the army was off its guard. Zebah and Zalmunna fled, and he pursued them and took the two kings of Midian, Zebah and Zalmunna, and threw all the army into a panic. When Gideon, son of Joash, returned from the battle by the ascent of Heres, he caught a young man, one of the people of Sukkoth, and questioned him. And he listed for him the officials and elders of Sukkoth, 77 people. Then he came to the people of Sukkoth and said, "Here are Zebah and Zalmunna, about whom you taunted me, saying, do you already have in your possession the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna, that we should give bread to your troops who are exhausted?" So he took the elders of the city, and he took thorns of the wilderness and briars. With them he trampled the people of Sukkoth. He also broke down the tower of Penuel and killed the men of the city. Then he said to Zebah and Zalmunna, "What about the men whom you killed at Tabor?" They answered, as you are, so were they, every one of them. They resembled the sons of a king. And he replied, they were my brothers, the sons of my mother. As the Lord lives, if you had saved them alive, I would not kill you. So he said to Jether, his firstborn, go kill them. But the boy did not draw his sword, for he was afraid, because he was still a boy. Then Zebah and Zalmunna said, you come and kill us, for as the man is, so is his strength. So Gideon proceeded to kill Zebah and Zalmunna, and he took the crescents that were on the necks of their camels. All right. Met the kings and did them in. What in that did you see that you need to ask questions about? Anything?
Why did he want his
Why was
son
he
to kill
asking-
them?
Yeah.
Yes, very good. I think it's on the next slide. So
Okay.
let me go through this and then I'll answer that question when we get to the
Okay.
next slide. Okay. This passage of the story of Gideon and the 300 soldiers defeating 15,000, they had already killed, that was the number I was looking for earlier, 120,000 soldiers. And this was all that was left of the Midianite army. Zebah and Salmunna flee, and Gideon pursues them and captures them. Keeping his word to the officials of Succoth and Penuel, he returns and he makes good on the threat to both communities. Then Gideon's attention turns to the king. He gives them plenty of reason why they should die. And, oh, maybe we're going to do it right here. And then tells his son to kill them. And I said, I wonder why. He does this to avenge the death of his brothers at the hands of the two kings. Now, Gideon's son is young and scared. Like Gideon at the beginning of the story, Gideon has to do the job himself. I think that the idea is that Gideon is, that's beneath me. I'm going to hand this over to my son and let him do you guys in. That's the only thing that I could find in my commentaries.
And
I
let me
don't-
just traumatize the child.
Well, it could be that too. Yeah. I'm wondering how old the son is, because it looks like he's there with Gideon at the battle, or on the battlefield.
Gotta be at least 13. Then he's
Oh,
a man.
There we go. That's what I was looking for. I see you sitting there. It's like Lauren has two heads.
You smell like chocolate.
I had a thought about why
Yes.
Gideon wanted his son to do it.
Okay.
And it's a practical thought. It's not very spiritual.
Oh,
But Gideon already done killed 120,000 dudes. He's tired. It's hard work killing a man with a sword.
Had he eaten
yeah,
at that point
okay.
too?
I mean, he had to chase these dudes down.
mhm.
They didn't give him bread, right?
Right.
So then he got to kill those guys. Then he's got to go drag them through all the towns and kill all those guys. And
Okay.
I've never killed a person with anything, let alone a sword.
Oh, okay.
But it's
That's
hard
good to
work.
hear.
It's hard work swinging a sword around all day.
Yeah, I'd say it is.
He's like, look, kid, you guys are not worth my energy. You are not worth my effort.
Right.
My son is going to kill you. And it's also in a form of embarrassment, to be beaten
Right.
by a kid.
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, that's kind of what I was heading to with the thing about Gideon's too good to be doing this. So I'm gonna pass it off to my son to get you guys. I appreciate that. Thank you.
That's my input for the night. Have a good
Maybe I
evening.
need to start looking at a more practical approach rather than spiritual.
Grayson was listening to all of that and he was like, I'm
Okay.
not killing people with swords.
Oh, gee.
That's all right.
Yeah. All right. Just 2 verses for the next passage. Oh, anything else on that last passage?
Mommy can't read the book.
Okay. This is where the story takes a turn, and it's a very interesting turn. Now understand, Gideon is a judge. That's his role in this story. Just verses 22 and 23. Then the Israelites said to Gideon, rule over us, you and your son, and your grandson also, for you have delivered us out of the hand of Midian. Gideon said to them, I will not rule over you, and my son will not rule over you, and the Lord will rule over you. I tried to put an and in there. So the son won't rule, God will. Yeah, that was all of that, right? So at chapter 7, this chapter, I'm sorry, I'm getting behind. This chapter, God tells Gideon, I'm going to pare down your army from 30,000 to 300, excuse me. And I'm doing this because I don't want the Israelites to be able to say, we're the ones that took out the Midianites, or anybody else took out the Midianites. It had to be God that did this. And the Israelites did exactly the opposite. Well, if Gideon was the one that defeated the army, so let's make him a king. They offer Gideon a hereditary monarchy, and that's just what we read. The son, the grandson, they want Gideon's ancestors to rule over them. And Gideon doesn't want to be king. He doesn't want any of the monarchy type stuff, but he does want something. We know that we'll talk about what he wants in a minute. But we know that Gideon and 300 soldiers, there's no way they could have defeated 135,000 people, soldiers, without God intervening. Gideon reminds the Israelites that it is God that defeated the Midianites and that God will rule over them, which is very noble of him to do. But nobility doesn't last. The being noble and declining this doesn't last. Anything in those two verses that you want to discuss? I think they're pretty self-explanatory. All right, 24 through 28. Then Gideon said to them, let me make a request of you. Each of you give me an earring that was taken as booty. I love that. This is a New Revised Standard Bible. And this was taken like as pirate's booty or something. For the enemy had golden earrings because they were Ishmaelites. We'll talk about that in a minute. But let's see, we will willingly give them, they answered. So they spread a garment, and each threw into it an earring he had taken as booty. The weight of the golden earrings that he requested was 1,700 shekels of gold, apart from the crescents and the pendants and the purple garments worn by the kings of Midian and the collars that were on the necks of their camels. Gideon made an ephod of it and put it in his town in Ophrah. And all of Israel prostituted themselves to it there. And it became a snare to Gideon and to his family. So Midian was subdued before the Israelites, and they lifted up their heads no more. So the land had rest 40 years in the days of Gideon. A lot of stuff to unpack in there. Anything on your mind at the moment?
Seems like there's a recurring theme. I think there may have been one, there was like 7 years of peace, but am I mistaken? It's like, there's always like 40 years of peace before it breaks loose again?
Yes. And I think in one of the earlier chapters, we talked about the years may not be actual like 365 days type years. They may be a generation of people. I'm not sure. I don't know the time frame here. there are scholars that say it was 40 years, and there are others that say it was a span of time. So Gideon has decided to change things up. I don't want to be king, but you can share in the spoils of war. Give me these golden earrings that you took as your prize, and that's what I want as compensation.
And
We
so-
haven't had any judges before that sought compensation for what they did.
And they worship that. Is that what we read, that they started worshiping that?
Yes, he created an
made.
ephod, and that, let me see if yeah.
Like-
Gideon creates an ephod with the gold, and there's some jewels in there that they've collected, and all of these different things, the purple fabric and all of this. Let me back up for a moment. The Ishmaelites, that's where I wanted to go next. The Ishmaelites were descendants of Abraham. So are the Israelites, and the Midianites. All three groups are descendants of Abraham. The Ishmaelites were by Abraham's handmaid, I'm sorry, Sarah, his wife's handmaid. If you remember the story, Sarah was barren. She said, well, go have a baby with Hagar because you need a son. The son's name was Ishmael. And after Sarah became pregnant, they sent Ishmael and Hagar away, banished them. Then the Midianites were descendants of Abraham by his second wife, Keturah. The Israelites, we know, started with Abraham and Sarah. So I found that interesting that all three groups can direct their entire descendancy to Abraham. Now, Abraham was the forefather of all three groups. I wonder if they knew that. Anyway, so the ephod that Gideon created became a source of idolatrous worship. It could have been the chief priest he wore this big breastplate as part of his priestly robes, and it was gold and it had jewels and that sort of thing. We talked about that when we were studying 1 Samuel. Eli, the chief priest, had an ephod, and they talked about Samuel passing along his ephod when he died. I believe that was how that went. But anyway, it could have been that, or it could have just been some type of idol that Gideon created. We don't know what exactly the ephod was in this case. At the very beginning of this story, Gideon tore down an idolatrous temple, the temple of Baal. And now he finishes out his career by leading all of Israel away from God, which was not the role of a judge. That I just find that interesting. Gideon,
Smart.
yeah.
Yeah.
And that's going to start a cycle, that pattern that we talk about each time, the apostasy and the cry, the hardship, the crying out for help, and then God sending rescue. That's starting right here. Gideon's still alive, and he's the main reason the people are turning away from God.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that a little bit more after I read this passage. Anything else in that other passage that you want to discuss? Okay. 29 through the end of the chapter. I don't know why they switched back to Jerubbaal, or Jerubbaal, excuse me, son of Joash, but they do. He went to live in his own house. Now Gideon had 70 sons, his own offspring, for he had many wives. His concubine, who was Shechem, also bore him a son, and he named him Abimelech. Then Gideon, son of Joash, died at a good old age and was buried in the tomb of his father Joash at Ophrah of the Abiezrites. As soon as Gideon died, the Israelites relapsed and prostituted themselves with the Baals, making Baal Berith their god. The Israelites did not remember the Lord their God, who had rescued them from the hand of all their enemies on every side, and they did not exhibit loyalty to the house of Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, in return for all the good that he had done to Israel. All right. So what in that do you want to break down first, or should we just go through this? This last passage is the account of Gideon's retirement and then his death. And we start to see the transition of the son, just Abimelech. He was named intentionally because chapter 9 is about him.
Oh.
Yeah.
I switched my translation over for a second,
Yes.
and it said, Gideon was hardly cool in the tomb when the people of Israel had gotten off track and were prostituting themselves to Baal.
That's an interesting wording.
Yeah.
Which version were you reading that out? I'm sorry?
The Message.
The Message. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Barely cool in the tomb. That's pretty quick. And what do? They immediately, as soon as Gideon's gone, turn right back to the Baals that God had Gideon destroy at the beginning of his term as judge. So that's what's going on here. We're back at the pattern, the apostasy where Israel turns away from God, the hardship, Israel faces the consequences of their apostasy, the consequences of turning their belief back away from God. And then they cry out for help because they can't take the consequences anymore. And then God sends a deliverer of some kind. So in this chapter, the apostasy starts while Gideon's alive. They start worshiping this ephod that he created and put in his hometown of Ophrah. And like we said before, he could be blamed for causing the Israelites to turn away, for starting their apostasy. Baal Berith, I don't know if I put this on another slide, maybe. Okay, no. Baal Berith is, the Baals were just a group of gods. We've talked about that before. The name Baal meant referred to a group of these pagan gods, and this Berith is one particular god. I couldn't find any information about Baal Berith, except that his name in Hebrew means the Lord of the Covenant. And it says here, more likely Covenant Baal, which would have been like an exploitive misuse of the religion. Okay, we'll see that again. El Berith. I'm reading my notes as I'm talking to you. That's why I'm quieting down for a moment. Close to the end of chapter 9, we're going to talk about Baal Berith again. So what in there do we need to talk about? Nothing? It's all clear as mud. Let's see. Yes.
I had a question. So, when it talked about the giving the earrings,
Yes.
it said the enemies being Ishmaelites all wore gold earrings.
Yes.
So
I
just
don't know what the significance of the earrings were, if that's what you're asking.
Like,
Why
did
they would have
Gideon-
worn them.
did
What's that?
Gideon wear earrings?
Did who? I'm sorry.
Gideon.
I don't believe so.
Okay.
No. The Ishmaelites, I don't know the actual history, but the Muslims today are tied to Ishmael.
Mhm.
They trace some of their origin back to Ishmael. So what if that has anything to do with it at all? You know, we know in the Muslim culture there's a lot of like gold adornment and
Okay. I just thought
that
that was
sort of thing. I really don't know, and I may be talking out of turn. That I didn't really research. I just from the past understood that Muslim or Islam came from Ishmael.
Yeah, that's what Jeff just told me a few minutes ago. I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
So it was a more or less, you think, a culture thing, or, a financial status type of thing?
Probably both. Probably both. We talked about that the Midianites earlier on in the book of Judges were taxing the Israelites. When the Midianites moved in and took over, they started taxing the Israelites. So they definitely were wealthy. They had camels that the Israelites didn't have. I would guess maybe it probably is a status symbol, but you notice I put a lot of maybe and probably in there. There really wasn't a whole lot of information about the earrings themselves.
Mhm.
Let's see. Anything else that we need to talk about or discuss?
I just found something maybe about the
Okay.
earrings.
Please.
It said that the Ishmaelites wore gold earrings because of their wealth from international trade. Even their
Okay.
camels wore expensive finery. Their collars were decorated with gold.
Okay.
So maybe it was like a status symbol.
Right. Well, and if you remember, it said that when Gideon killed off the two kings, he took the collars off the camels, and
Oh yeah.
yeah, there were a couple
Yeah.
of mentions of the collars on the camels.
Okay.
So yeah, that lends some more to that. That's interesting. I don't know if I'd put gold around a camel's neck.
I guess people do it around their dogs and stuff. They give their dogs like diamond colors.
Yes, they
Not
do.
us, but
Not us either. Um, okay. Anything else that you want to talk about on this? Well, that was important, I thought. Oh, there he is. Yeah.
Hey, Ollie.
say hi.
All right. Well, I'm gonna pause the video. I think we're done teaching. Maybe. Where is it? There we go.